What's up, everyone? Welcome to season 4 of My Boulevard podcast. This season, we're doing something special. I am here with my co-host, Missy. Say what's up to the people, Missy.
Hello, I'm so excited to join you, Dhati. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to talk about the who, what, when, where, how, and why of urban missions.
That's right. This season, we are going to be walking through together, like live, real conversations. We're going to be talking about real questions, really practical wisdom about how to do ministry in urban environments.
Yeah, this is going to be a primer for all of us. So let's join this journey. Let's grow, learn, and push forward urban missions together.
Stay tuned. This season, we're going to talk about how you can do ministry where you live, where you work, and where you worship. So let's go.
Let's go.
Welcome to season 4, episode number 3 of This Is My Boulevard podcast. My name is Dhati Lewis, and I'm here with my co-host,
Missie Branch. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and we're excited. We're excited. We are talking all things urban, and we are going to continue in that. Today we're going to be talking about why. Why do urban missions, and especially in God's economy, the kingdom of God?
I can think about me living as a little girl in a city and really wondering, does God see me? Does God care that I'm here? Does God care about the issues around me? And I remember going to church and feeling like these people believe that God is answering his prayers, so he's showing up to this space.
Yeah.
So God, I really do believe that he wants to meet the needs of his people in those spaces for his namesake, first of all.
Yeah.
For his namesake. This is his. And then I think it's because it's his. And then I think because we're image bearers and he cares about the needs, the hearts, the desires, the eternities of his image bearers. So I do believe that this matters to God. And so we should be doing what matters to God.
Yeah, I think that is so good. And especially when you think about that struggle that you have, because I think that's a common struggle that we all have, especially in a place like a city when you got so many people.
Yes.
And you just kind of like, man, there's so many people. There's no way God has time for me.
Right.
No way God sees me
Yes.
because there's so many people, so many things,
Yes.
right? And I think that oftentimes I tell people, I think every individual needs to fly on an airplane. And they also need to live in a small city, a small town. And the reason why is like when you're in the airplane, you look out, you get in the window seat in the airplane, you look out, and it looks like a little playground.
Yes.
It's just like everything is neatly ordered and things like, man, you just think about, man, how small we really are into this thing. But then when you live in a small town, you recognize that none of us live a life in a vacuum. Like our lives influence and affect so many people, right? And I think that is the reality that we often wrestle with, especially in cities and urban environments. And so, when God is raising up urban missionaries, we get a chance to be a tangible expression to the gospel and say, hey, beautiful. God sees you.
Yes.
He has seen you. Yes. He has sent me, right?
Yes.
To be a conduit of his grace, to him.
It's interesting because it's the spaces, the Lord, he's drawn to the weak, the broken, and you find so much broken in cities. Not that brokenness doesn't exist everywhere, but the brokenness in cities tends to be palpable. Yeah. And then you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense that the Lord would show up here, but I don't think we think that way when we plan out our Christian plan for what's next in our lives.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you. I was just like, what is unique about doing ministry in the city, right?
Yeah, doing ministry in a city, you have to be already prepared to meet kind of humanitarian, regular justice kind of community outreach needs. Like people in cities, there's always whole areas of people who are hungry, who lack an education or access to good education. Right now, if I go back to my elementary school, and I have, there are math books in it with my name in it. And it's been a long time since I've been in elementary school, and they haven't had a new resource since.
So like your literal name. I thought like mathematicians were writing about you. They were writing about you because,
that I literally had, no, they wouldn't be writing about me. No, the book that I scrawled my name in. And so now there's just like 4 of them in the whole class, and there's nothing. So these kids don't have books. And I remember we went home with books. Yeah. And, I understand technology, but that's not the reason always in communities. And so I think that you have to be prepared to be meeting needs and not just showing up, slinging around influence, but like going into the gutter.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, because when we talk about cities, we talk about density, diversity, disparity, right? That is urban. And when we're talking about that, and so now with cities being kind of this new urban, there's the gentrified, there's the lower income, all of those things, but we all experience brokenness, right? So let's just take like this idea. There's a term that people don't like now, or people get nervous. Let me just say they get nervous, where it's like justice, equity, because those are trigger words now for anybody, and people automatically start saying, "Oh, yeah, yeah," but and he's just like, "Oh goodness, what you gonna say? What you gonna say? What you gonna say?" But like when you think about that, I think it's important because as a pastor in a church in a city, one of the things I constantly have to communicate is like, let's not confuse maturity, Christian maturity, with middle classism. Right. And so let's not confuse that and think just because you are middle class that you are more mature than someone who has less money or less wages than you. Right. And I think that idea, because that idea of justice simply is the same kind of root word of righteousness. And it's like this idea of being right standing with God, right relationship with one another, right relationship with God. And so this idea of justice is a biblical word. It's a gospel word, and I think it's really important for us to understand that as we're thinking about this idea of justice. And so, as you kind of think about this idea of doing ministry in cities where there's both rich, there's poor, and all that, like how would you engage in this conversation that justice without being too woke? Because we don't want
it's crazy because when I think of communities where people are longing for justice, where people wish they had just access to this, or they wish they could experience that, they wish they knew this, tasted that, what they're longing for is justice. And our God is justice,
He's a God
and
of
so
justice.
there's this longing for justice will bring wholeness. And so you watch this longing for that wholeness and you say that wholeness is justice. I heard a woman at a conference say, we call her Auntie Karen, but Karen Ellis.
Yes. I love Karen.
She said, she's awesome. And she said at a conference, when the Lord returns, we're all going to experience justice. And we're all going to be good with it. You're like, and that just seems so crazy to me, because you're like, no, in order for me to get justice, you got to lose. And in order for you to get justice, he's got to give up something. But the Lord is like, no, I am justice. I will make this right. And so when I think of doing ministry in urban spaces and I think of justice, I think of the longing that people have and how as believers we can come in and point them to what justice really is and who justice really is.
And who. And it's, and that justice is about equity. It's about coming together. And again, Jesus says there's always going to be poor. So when you hear us say words like equity and justice, we're not like, there's always going to be poor among us. That's the words of our Savior. There's always going to be poor among us, but it doesn't mean that they're less than. There's like, and again, and so like I constantly tell people, I was like, how many of us has a plan? Does anybody ever have any elders in your church that are on welfare, that are on poverty? And I was just like, we've had elders that are poverty, and most of us they don't have that mindset. It's just like, because we think it was like he who has the most money, he who is the business owner, and we see the sin of the American, right? And that's the kind of brokenness, right? The brokenness that we see. But when I think about the word justice, I think justice and reconciliation comes together into one word, and and that's that word righteousness. And here's the thing. James chapter 1 talks about this. He says, hey, and this is the Dhati Lewis translation of it. He's like, hey, you who are rich and privileged, you need to think more lowly of yourself. But you who are marginalized and disenfranchised, you need to think more highly of yourselves. Why? Because we're all peers at the foot of the cross. That is what we're talking about. That's justice, right? That is where we understand that we're not saying, you poor guy, poor woman, you will go over there. You rich guy, you influential guy, you come over here in the place of honor. No, that's not justice. That's not the word. That's not God's economy. And so I think it's really important for us to do that, right? And so when we talk about that, we talk about it in kind of four areas: spiritually, emotionally, economically, and socially, right? And again, these are all implications of the gospel, right? These are implications. So again, do not email me, do not call me, do not talk to me about like that. I'm not saying emotion is the gospel. I'm not saying economics is the gospel, but there's a passage in the Bible that says, Ephesians chapter 2 says, we are saved by grace, that it's not of our works, it's a gift of God, not of ourselves, right? But then immediately after says, we were created for good works.
Yep.
So that's important.
I think one of the things that's necessary when you even think urban missionary and why that would be important to God is because there's a lot of advocacy that comes in that. When you think of someone being whole emotionally, spiritually, physically, mentally, all of these different ways, financially, economically, whatever, you think about the need for someone to advocate for that to happen in those spaces. And that again represents Jesus, who is our advocate. And I really do believe that we forget sometimes when we get to be middle class, those of us who knows what it's like to be very poor, who have worked and God has been faithful, and we're not always that as poor as we were, because all of us make it to middle class, but we're not as poor as we were, right?
Not as poor as we
right.
I'm with you.
We have responsibility still to advocate for whatever that thing may be. And in different spaces, it's different things. So I'm not telling you what to advocate for, but advocacy is a part of urban missionary work.
Yes. And I think in order for us to advocate, we got to first embrace the fact that we are all broken.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And we are all in need.
Yep.
Right. And I think that that's important. And I want you to hear me when we talk about this, because let's just take economics. There are people who are making millions of dollars that are still economically broken. Right. And they're more broken than people who are on welfare and poverty, right? Because it's not just simply about the amount of money, right? If you look at the parables, Jesus says he gave some 5 talents, he gave some 3, some 2, some 1. He says, but in his economy there, it's all little. He says, and if you're not faithful over the little, right? And he was just, whether you got 5, you got 3, you got 1, or it's all little in him. How can I put you faithful over much? And so it's about how we view money. And some of us have a very broken understanding of and view of our wealth, right? And we are broken. And so when we talk about brokenness, here, at the church, I'm not just talking about the poor. I'm talking about everyone. Like, we are broken economically, and we got to take on God's view of money as a tool for things. And whether you are a 5 talent guy, because some people have the ability to work 40 hours and make millions of dollars. And some people have the ability to work 70 hours and only make $20,000, $30,000. But that's a sign of so many things, but it's not an indicator of your spirituality. Right, in your walk with God. And so there's a statement that we constantly say, which says, how you view and manage your wealth is the best indicator of your spiritual health. Right. And
great.
But in that statement, I hope you heard me say it, it has nothing to do how much you have.
Right.
It's about your view and your management of.
I know you can judge by where organizations, where they put their money, where people's loves and hearts are. And when you watch communities of people, when they get something, nothing changes about their lives other than the things they acquire, shoes, bags, whatever it is. And don't get me wrong, I like shoes and bags.
Yes.
I'm not hating. Again, no emails. But you realize that that's because of the economic brokenness. And then, we were just watching a documentary of these guys who went to the NFL, and how now when you go to the NFL, they give you training on how to work on your finances because of the vast number of NFL players who, after 2 years outside of the NFL, were flat broke. Because just because you get the money doesn't mean you know what to do with the money.
But now you're hitting close to home, because that is my story. My dad played football, and I remember going in, do whatever you want, give whatever you want, and and in literally 2 years we were on welfare. And I spent most of my middle school, high school on welfare, because my dad was in the hood. He grew up, his mom was the prostitute. She got murdered when he was 13 years old, but he had a talent to play sports, and that was his ticket out of the hood.
Wow.
Right. And then, but then they give him all this money.
And you don't know what to do.
He lived a life, and then as soon as it was over, he thought it was going to be forever. As soon as it was over, it was done. And we went back to the other extreme. And so there are there are real legitimate worlds and stories and things when we're doing ministry in that word that we constantly talk about, the disparity.
Yes.
Right. And so, as we kind of conclude this session, like as we engage, no matter where you are in the brokenness and you're trying to seek justice and equity and right relationship with people, what are some ways that you would just say, like, hey, this is how we need to engage, with people, right, that are diverse?
I think we need to look beyond ourselves. It's, in cities, you don't really have, well, you do have the opportunity to find people that are just like you, but you also have the opportunity to find people that are so different from you right down the street, right around the corner, a bus ride away. I think relationships, fostering community. And then that brings me into something that we're going to be talking about, anything is discipleship.
Yeah.
Really helping people. Discipleship is mentorship,
Yes.
but with a heavenly theme behind it, right?
Yeah.
But to really begin to help shape people's theology, help shape people's economic visions and advocacy and all of those things, to give them a vision. So I think in urban spaces, relationship is so important, and fostering community and recognizing that we're all the same, like you've said, even though we look differently.
Yeah, right. I love that. Like times we say, hey, invite people into relationships, not time and space. And I think what you're saying, in order for us to do that, one of the number one foundational principles I think in urban that we got to embrace if we're going to make disciples is simply this concept of recapturing hospitality.
Yes.
Right. And when I think about hospitality, I'm not talking about like Martha Stewart hospitality, we just put on an apron, which is good hospitality.
I was about to say, like, it worked for her.
It worked for her. But I guess I'm just saying, like, it's not
But
just it
that's
because
not
everybody
just
says, well, I don't
that.
like cooking. I don't like. I'm talking about holistically. I love Henry Nouwen's definition. He says hospitality is creating space
Yes.
where you can invite your enemy to become a friend, right? And I think in a world where as soon as you stand for anything, people are going to put you in you're my enemy, you're against me category.
Right.
We have to recapture hospitality.
Yes.
And if we're going to move from an ethnic missiology to a neighbor missiology, we got to recapture hospitality, which is inviting people back into relationship. And I think that is going to be, that's critical and essential. And so, yeah.
Wow. And we live in 2025 where inviting people in is the opposite of what our society is so in is me. This is my space. And so it's profound. Profound.
So stay with us as we continue to join this journey, because we're going to move into like, okay, what are some ways that we can actually make disciples in an urban environments? We're going to talk about like the who is an urban missionary and ways, and we're just going to continue on, but we're talking all things urban. I'm here with Missie Branch, and I'm excited about kind of where both God is doing through My Boulevard and through your Boulevard. So stay tuned.